Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Hi, welcome to Economics. It's a little more than 4 months since India locked down to tackle the coronavirus pandemic and also started unlocking in the last few weeks. The economic impact of this has been discussed in great detail, and also the way the Indian government has tried to revive the economy in the aftermath of the lockdown. But how the Indian government has gone about doing this has been much different from how other economies, other countries around the world have tried to deal with the pandemic and revive the economy. To discuss that, we have Professor Ila Patnaik with us. Hi, Ila, welcome back. You have sought to distinguish how India has done, and how the other countries have. Can you first tell us what has been the difference in how India has gone about it?
India has removed a large number of restrictions that were there in place on various economic activities. We've had earlier episodes where we've discussed in detail some of the changes that were done in agriculture and agricultural marketing and trading. Similarly, there have been reforms in mining, FDI in defense, in telemedicine, and various economic activities which were illegal or were restricted to begin with. And because they were restricted, people were not able to engage in those activities even when there was demand. So in response to the pandemic, one of the things that we noticed that the government has done, both the central government and actually various state governments as well, is to remove those restrictions. So when you make something that was illegal now into legitimate legal activity, then actually you allow people to be able to engage in those activities and sustain themselves. So that has been an important element of the response, which is very different from the response of other governments.
We have always talked about how many major economies have just pumped in a lot of money into the economy to revive their economies and support people, direct transfers, and things like that. India also did very small amounts of direct transfers, but we have also discussed how India doesn't have the fiscal room to pump in money into the economy. But that is not the only reason why India's response has been different, is it?
That's right. So those economies, so look at economies across Europe and America, they did not have the kind of restrictions that we had in place. So removing them was not a way to increase potential output. It was, already they didn't have a legacy of, let's say, loss-making public sector enterprises and loss-making public sector banks. They did not have restrictions on movements of people and produce, and they did not have restrictions on FDI. We leave the question of China aside, and that's a whole different story. But they did not have those kind of restrictions. So actually, there was no gain that they could achieve. They had already done those reforms. Those who had these restrictions had done those reforms. UK had done them a long time ago in the time of Thatcher. Other countries in Eastern Europe had done those reforms long ago. So there was no scope for increasing growth by reform or liberalization or removing restrictions. That was not going to give them an increase in potential output. Whereas in our case, because we had not done those reforms, we had that scope that we could just say, without spending a rupee, you just say that, okay, I allow this activity, and then private households and businesses engage in that activity, and you get a scope for increased activity without the government having to actually do any spending. And because they did not have that potential, whereas we did, so our response included allowing a lot of things to be done now.
Also, there was this issue of formalization of the economy. Like, if you take a decision in a say a Germany or a UK or a France, the decision trickles down through the economy. It doesn't work like that for India. Can you elaborate on that point you have made, Ila?
Absolutely. So, one of the things that is important when the government takes a decision is how does it go down all the way to small firms, for example. So, let's say that it is a decision about more liquidity and credit in the formal system. So, many central banks across the world have pumped in liquidity into systems. Here, when you pumped in liquidity, which you did, and you did allow banks to lend more, they reached out to the larger firms or the formal firms at least. They could not reach out to the informal firms because the informal firms were never in that net. They were never in that formal credit system. So that means that all those people who were not in that system, when they faced a lockdown, then even when the government pumped in liquidity, they were not going to be able to get any benefit out of it. They were largely out of the system. It was largely bigger firms who had lending relationships with banks or with NBFCs, those who already were part of the system who were going to immediately get a benefit. It's also true for fiscal support. So, there was a question about uh, getting migrants help, which was absolutely essential. Right in the beginning of the lockdown, the migrants who were there in cities did not receive any help. One element of the story was that unlike the Manrega system, for example, in villages, the fiscal system also did not include them. So they were outside that formal official system where immediately with a switch of a button you could reach out to them. And so small businesses, people who were in the informal economy, could actually not be targeted as well as those that were in the formal economy.
We've talked about some of the restrictions that were removed on, for example, agriculture sector, the cooperative banks and the banking sector reforms. You also mentioned this week in your column, and I would ask our viewers to read the column, which is in our description, on creating a legal framework for telemedicine. I mean, that is a significant, development because it increases access to healthcare. Can you elaborate on that, Ila?
Absolutely. There was the guidelines for telemedicine were issued sometime in April. So, when it was realized that right after the lockdown, people did not have access to doctors, to hospitals, and also that you didn't want them to be crowding these hospitals. So at that time, these guidelines were issued. So, for example, they say that if you are a registered doctor and you have a patient who can be examined through video or on telephone and who can be prescribed the medicine, you need to understand the identity of the person. You need to be sure who the person is. After ensuring that you know the identity of the patient, you can prescribe certain medications. In fact, there are some medications that cannot be prescribed there as well, and that need a physical examination. But it increases the scope of what can be done through telemedicine. Now, while this activity could, in principle, have been done even before the pandemic, but the fact that there was a pandemic and it created a situation where this activity became needed, uh, became safer for people to engage in, the restriction on telemedicine was in that sense removed, and people were allowed to uh, doctors were allowed to prescribe medicines through this, through video or phone. And now that sort of a thing, once it happens, can be carried over later as well. It will be carried over later as well because, for many things, people find it convenient to speak to a doctor, to pay the doctor, and now it's something that can legitimately be done.
And what has been significant or different this time in the measures that have been announced and the reforms that have been launched is that the state governments have also been active participants. For instance, we saw labor law reforms in some states, along with the announcements the central government made. So why do you stress on the fact that states and the center have acted in consonance this time, and what difference does that make?
This time, when when the pandemic spread, as people understood, both I think the center and the state governments, they understood that this wasn't going to go away very soon. That the time it would take for herd immunity or vaccines to come through, people need to be able to survive. Fiscal resources are very limited, both with the center and with the states. With economic activity down, tax collections are low. So they could not depend so much on fiscal resources. As we discussed, the liquidity outreach of the formal banking system was limited. So both the center and the states, therefore, tried to look for things that they could do which could allow people to survive. I think so. We saw things like the UP government come up with labor reforms. In fact, later some of the reforms were reversed because the center, or some of, shall I call them, the steps that some of the regulations that had been made for a very short time, they got reversed when the center opposed them and said that they were perhaps not in line with India's international obligations because India is part of the ILO. Similarly, Karnataka has done land reforms. MP has done reforms in agricultural markets and so on. So I think everyone was understanding that we don't have the fiscal resources, and if it is possible for us to change laws or to change regulations, and that allows people to survive and to earn and for economies to grow, then we need to do what we can. So in this period, we see an attitude of, trying to push through those things where without resources, we simply, by allowing people to do economic activity and allowing them to survive on their own, there's a bias towards that in terms of the decisions taken by both the center and the states.
So, what is your take, Ela, on all these measures that have been announced and steps that have been launched, uh, actually helping us, helping India get around, the economic difficulties, the economic hardships that have been caused by the lockdown and the slow unlockdown process? Will they work? Can they work?
Yeah, I think while some of them may have limited immediate effects, but I think in the long run, they help us to achieve our potential and to achieve higher growth. Uh, After all, a lot of these were reforms that were not done in 1991, where most of the reforms were done for industry, which were on the table, but because of various political opposition lobbies or inertia through various governments, these reforms did not get done. Uh, Most countries have done them decades ago,
Mhm.
and we were still stuck with a lot of, we still are, I mean, there are many more as well, but for example, disinvestment of PSUs, there have been many on the list. Every time it comes up, there is a discussion that they'll get done, and yet they didn't get done for a long time. And we kept on, government keeps on spending, putting in taxpayer money year after year into loss-making PSUs. So there are many such
Mhm.
things that have now come on the table. So I think that a lot of these increase the long-term potential growth of the Indian economy, and it will help us in the long run. Some of them may not have immediate benefits, but then they will definitely have longer term returns.
So we must be prepared for a slow recovery, so to speak.
Yes, we are. I think we are understanding that the pandemic is taking longer than one might have hoped, that it didn't end with the first lockdown or the second lockdown, and it has been going on for a while. But I think more recently, some of the news, especially from cities like Delhi and Bombay, has been good news. And as economic activity recovers in these cities, and now when there is there are less restrictions and some of the earlier difficulties have been addressed, then we will come out of the present situation.
The process of coming out has begun, but it will take its own time. But the good news is it has started. Thank you for watching this episode of Economics. We will be back with a fresh one next week. And I would also like to thank all the viewers and our readers who have taken paid subscriptions to The Print. Please do take subscriptions, because good journalism needs readers and viewers to pay for it. And if you've not done so, I would urge you to go to our website and go to theprint.in/subscriptions and take subscriptions. Thank you very much for watching. We will be back next week with another episode of Economics. Until then, stay safe. Thank you.